Hello, everybody, and welcome to ADR Chambers Investigations webinar. This is the second in a series of webinars covering workplace disputes. These sessions are geared to HR professionals, but of course, everyone who's interested in investigations and resolution of disputes is welcome. Today's subject is AI in the workplace, tools, trips, and traps to avoid. We all know that workplaces are being transformed by AI. Whether we love it or hate it, the challenge for HR is to understand it, support their people through it, and manage the risks it creates. It's important to say that managing AI is not HR's responsibility alone. It falls on IT, policy, operations, and a board if there is one. But HR plays a central role alongside other organizational leaders. Let me start by introducing myself and the panel members. I am Naomi Bussin, Managing Director, Dispute Resolution Partnerships with ADR Chambers. I'm responsible for the Investigation and Integrity Commissioner portfolios. This means that I work with investigators and with clients to identify services and develop processes that meet their needs and connect clients with our expert panel members. I'm a lawyer with a background in dispute resolution, including mediation, complaint resolution, investigations, and system design in the public and private sectors. Next, I will introduce Jay Deen. Jay is a partner at TechScale Partners, where he helps enterprise and public sector organizations adopt AI responsibly, from implementation and assessment to aligning deployments with governance frameworks. A former CTO and founder, he works directly with leadership teams on the practical questions of risk, control, and getting real value from AI in production. In speaking with Jay about this webinar, I was very impressed with his understanding of the current landscape and issues, his practical insights about the complex subject of AI, and his ability to communicate to non-techies like me and perhaps like you. Last, I want to introduce Michael Maynard. Michael Maynard is Senior Staff Investigator with ADR Chambers. He's also a mediator, facilitator, and integrity commissioner for 24 municipalities and 3 school boards, and an associate investigator for several other municipalities. Michael is a licensed private investigator, a certified workplace fairness analyst, and has been approved by the Ontario Public Service as an external investigator for workplace discrimination and harassment complaints. Michael is our most experienced investigator. He's knowledgeable, thoughtful, and pragmatic, and I know will benefit from his insights today. To give you a roadmap for today's discussion, our panel members will work through a fact scenario involving inappropriate AI use on the part of an employee. First, Jay will speak about what went wrong and how it could have been avoided. Then Michael will speak about what to consider when investigating inappropriate AI use, and then how, as an investigator, you yourself can leverage AI tools to further your investigation. We'll watch a short video and Michael will speak briefly about using AI tools to apply specific facts to employment law requirements, such as reasonable notice and progressive discipline. And the panel will then discuss where organizations go from here. If you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please send them through the Q&A at any time. We do want to hear from you. We're going to start by a quick poll so we can find out where you're at with AI. Can we show the poll? Okay. The first poll is, how would you describe your organization's current approach to AI? One choice, from what's AI to ostrich approach to we're working on it, or we have a formal policy in place. Please vote. Okay, do we have results? Excellent, really helpful. Thank you. That will help us in today's discussion. So a lot of people working on it. And then I want to just talk about our scenario to set up today's discussion. Can we share the slide? Okay, today we're going to talk about Jamie. Jamie was hired 18 months ago as a policy analyst for the Ontario Advertising Agency, a fictional agency, the OAA. Jamie created a policy paper that was approved by management, the CEO, and the board, then released publicly. A journalist pushed back on the statistics, and Jamie admitted the paper was based on AI research and that the sources had not been independently verified. This is now a PR crisis for OAA, and HR is tasked with investigating. All right, that's the setup. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jay, who's going to talk about what went wrong here and why.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. So I'd say a few things went wrong in this scenario for Jamie. There's typically a number of different checkpoints, in terms of verification for these types of things, especially something that's very publicly fronted. And so what I would suggest is there was a bit of a failure on a few checkpoints, both, the management itself, the public release of this, and no one verified the claim. AI didn't break the process. It just revealed, the process ran on trust and not on verification. That's the first thing I would suggest in this scenario.
So what do you mean? So what's
Yeah,
wrong with trust? Why can't we rely on trust
yeah,
today?
no, for sure. And so AI, there's this idea of a hallucination. And what a hallucination is that a lot of these AI tools produce text that sounds right, but the text it isn't correct. It can have a confident tone, it can have like clean citations even, and but it can invent facts. And the output looks like great work, but it actually is made up. When they create these models, they train them with a goal, and the goal is effectively to answer the question or to, in some cases, provide something that is positive. And so it doesn't necessarily mean though that it's based on facts or grounding. And I think that's why it passed through the process. And probably Jamie in first blush looked like it was right. And even just what we've seen institutionally, there's especially in the legal domain, there's been many lawyers that have cited things in court cases that were hallucinations, which ended up with a blowback. And so I'd say, that's really one of the things where AI needs to be double checked and it needs to be verified. Also, there's a number of different other aspects around the AI policy and the tools that Jamie was using. So there's this whole idea, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with this concept of shadow AI. So there's two different ways that AI are typically deployed in enterprises. One is there's a formal process, hopefully some training ahead of time, and that there's an actual enterprise tool that has been licensed by the organization, and with that comes a number of different safeguards. And some of that is just around how information that's put into the model is leveraged in the future for training. And in some cases, if it's your personal account, it may be, while enterprise accounts that you're paying for basically have certain amounts of safeguards, including things called like zero data retention. So, especially in regulated environments, that's really important. So, in a case where, like, if a staff member, and I don't want to say it's Jamie in this case, but if they feed personal information into an unapproved tool, that can breach things like FIPA's like duty to safeguard it. It can have reportable breach, basically serious reportable breach that has to be notification. And there's things around like provincial and FIPA bodies that run like before any personal information is collected, like it needs to be disclosed. And so the AI output is like a record like any other. So the other thing is just understanding what type of tools Jamie was using. And then just around enterprise tools versus personal tools, enterprises, those tools though, fixes where your data goes, and so you're not training on your data, as I mentioned, the residency of that data, the logging, making sure that, it's tied to a given user within the enterprise, but it does nothing to verify whether the data is true or not. Like that hallucination can happen regardless if it's a personal or it's an enterprise account. This model still hallucinates the same way. And then, the last thing I'll say is around the different types of AI within an organization, whether it's enterprise AI, which comes with HR policies, which comes with appropriate training to understand things like hallucinations. Um, Shadow AI, which is happening in many organizations, it's kind of rational, not reckless. Like it's very easy to say, individuals shouldn't be using these tools, but the reality is people reach for it when they want to work faster, when there is no approved tool. So even if you do ban it, it doesn't stop people from using these tools. You just end up pushing it onto personal devices with zero visibility, which is even a higher risk. I think we need to give people a safe, sanctioned path instead, and with the right training and the right type of accounts. Um, and so one of the things around policies and it sounds like a lot of the people within the organization or within the survey we had have policies in place, which is great. Some of the core objectives when I look at types of policies that people need to have is very simply having what are the approved and unapproved AI tools. What are those things? Data classification, understanding what am I inputting into this chatbot or down the road into these types of agents, automated agents. That's important for people to understand what you can and can't put in, especially as it relates to personally identifiable information, sensitive information, especially under regulated environments. Zero data retention, which I talked about, which that what that means is that anything that you put into the chat or into those things aren't retained later on for either training data, or in some cases, a lot of these organizations like OpenAI or Anthropic will use it to reduce your costs. Because as you know, for AI, everyone is charged or enterprises are charged per token. And so that just ensures that there is no retention of that, even to optimize the cost of that, especially in a regulatory environment where you don't want any type of information being retained, even inadvertently in logs and those types of things. Um, there's things like training on enterprise data that are important, training on hallucination, which we touched about. And then the last thing around verification, I think this idea of having a human in the loop. I think as we adopt more of these tools, we need to put safeguards in place that really means that there are checks and balances to ensure that especially factual information is being confirmed around that. The last thing I'll say is, and I think it's really important for this group, is the use of AI is something that the organization is responsible for, not just HR professionals. In fact, it's very hard for HR to regulate. It's a combination, as you said, Naomi, with IT, with basically executive sponsorship. Having that type of ownership within the organization is a really, really important part of it, and it's an octopus in a lot of ways. It spans in many different parts of the org, and it's a challenge, especially because it's so nascent, but everyone is adopting it.
Mm.
And so, yeah,
Let me ask you, there's a few things that I have questions about, and Michael may have comments too, but is it just one policy then on the issue of policies? Because there's a few things that you said that would, go into a policy or would need to be written down. And um, it's hard to put that all in one place. And it's hard to capture it all in writing. Some of it is training and expectations and all of that stuff. But how many policies do you need? Are there different policies for different pieces of this?
I, I think what you end up doing is with the idea of AI usage, you have to look at things like, you know, um, both your HR policy, data like your classifications, looking at everything with a bit of a different lens. Because you're right, it's hard to encompass everything into either a single policy or, quite frankly, into a composite of the other policies you have, even with the AI lens. And I think it does require education. And I think there's so many different levels of sophistication as it relates to AI within the enterprise and within the sectors, and I think we need to assume everyone's almost at a base level and make sure we're educating everybody around both the risks and the usage of it, and making sure that different policies you have within an organization reflect these changes that we're seeing in real time.
So even if you had up and even if you have an enterprise platform and everybody's supposed to use one or the other and they know that, but somebody could still use their own account because it's easier and they want to, or whatever reason they have, which is what you were calling shadow AI. So whether you have or you don't have a policy, that's not necessarily stopping people from going off and doing their own thing. So any tips on how to deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few different ways to do it. And so first of all, there is IT policy, absolutely. And in a very similar way that you have approved applications that are, you're allowed to use, you would need to have certain types of things like device management to make sure things are being audited and logged around, even licensing and leveraging the usage of those tools as it relates to it. But also, there are products now coming into the market where it allows, very similar to when the internet came and there's this concept of a firewall, and not to get too technical about it, but it protects basically an enterprise organization from the outside internet versus what's coming in onto your intranet. In similar ways, there are tools now coming for AI. And I actually, I'm helping an organization. There's a product called Paramind where it works as a central proxy. And what that means is that everything kind of goes in that's dealing with AI, whether it's through Anthropic or through OpenAI, and we can actually have an audit log. We can look and see and verify who is doing that call, the risk associated with it, and the risk might be, what type of action are you doing? Are you like sending out a huge email through an automated AI, or are you, just checking to build a report internally? And so some of these tools are now emerging in the markets. But once again, it's so early days that it's a lot of it is just educating and making employees aware of these risks to start with.
Yeah, make them ask, if
Yeah.
they're not sure. Michael, did you have a comment?
I was going to say, it seems to me that, it's such a live in developing environment that the policy or policies that you develop also have to be approached in that way. Like you can't sort of say, okay, we've got the policy now, we're good. I think it constantly has to evolve. So it's like a living document itself, and everyone sort of has to continually be trained and updated on it. And I think part of that is because exactly what you were saying is that the AI it's everywhere. It's not just the specific enterprise tool that you adopt, but people have it on their own devices. But even if like I have like a Microsoft subscription and the Copilot is built into Word, right? And I go into my email, which is Google or Gmail based, and there's suggestions for things to write right there based on the email. So you really have to understand everywhere that the AI is, where it exists, and how people might be using it. And so even when you're developing the policy, it becomes like sort of a multi-part conversation, bringing in professionals from all these different areas, right? So you're going to have IT people, you're going to have leadership, you're going to have HR, you're going to have legal, you're going to have privacy experts. All of these people have to be involved in the development and ongoing monitoring of the policy and how it applies as the landscape changes over time.
That,
Absolutely. And just one of the emerging risks we're seeing now is computer use of these models. So in a lot of ways, 30 seconds is that the models now can kind of remotely control your web browser or your desktop. And that's, another risk that's associated with, because in a lot of ways it's running locally now on your machine and not going through the network. And so just something else to be aware of that it's just emerging now, right? So
Mhm.
sorry, Naomi, I think you had a
no,
comment.
no, I mean, actually wanted to talk about this, like risks. And so co-work is a risk. And can you just speak a bit more to the learning? Because I think that's really, that's important and people don't really understand it. There's, y- you were saying that, there could be a closed system, so the information isn't getting out, but there might still be requirements about keeping that information, like for example, FIPA. But when you're using a system that is not an enterprise system, so it's not closed, like can you just
Yeah.
explain what you meant there, just for those people who are just learning about the subject?
Absolutely. It's very similar to a lot of services on the internet. If you're not paying for the service, you are the product. You're paying for them to learn more of how you're using the system and training the system. And very similar to the AI systems today, if you're using a free account with OpenAI like chat.openai.com, or you're using Claude on Anthropic, if you're not exchanging money, which in some cases gives you a certain amount of privacy, especially the enterprise versions, because in a lot of ways, even at the consumer version, it was just giving you more access to tokens. If you're using the free version, they're using that information quite readily to train the next model. And so, what I've seen in the past, especially with folks who don't have policies and training in place, people have been updating or uploading employee information. People have been uploading confidential information, and truthfully, some of these are public companies, and I don't think employees, unless they're educated and understand the risks around this, don't know that in some cases, if they're doing it on their phone and they're at lunch and they get an email and say, "Oh, you need to respond to this email," and they're putting it into their private version, some of that information that they may be copying and pasting into their free account will eventually end up in some form of training data that could, end up in both reputational and legal risk.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna come back to some of these risks and what we do about them. And thank you, Jay, for talking about this. Now we're going to move on to Michael, who's going to speak about first about the investigations piece and then employment law. Michael, let's turn it over to you.
Sure. So we're looking at I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, we're looking at the Jamie scenario as our example of where this might come up for someone like me as a workplace investigator. And then also I want to look at how I might integrate AI and how sometimes I do integrate it into the work that I do in this area. So for Jamie's case, I think this, we're looking at a situation where maybe there isn't a policy in place and Jamie hasn't had training. So I think from an investigative point of view, if I was called in to do a fact finding, what exactly happened here? I would say that the investigation doesn't begin with an assumption that using AI was misconduct necessarily, unless there is a policy in place. That's really sort of a simplistic approach. I think what really we need to frame the issue as is one of professional judgment in this type of scenario, about accuracy, about Jamie's work product. What are the expectations of Jamie as an employee? What duties does Jamie owe the employer to produce work that is accurate and her own in this case, whether or not there's an official policy or not. I think there are also some questions again around what Jay was talking about, some of the risks around, was Jamie entering confidential organizational information into an AI that isn't in a closed loop or enterprise system, something that's a public type thing that you can access privately. As Jay was saying, if you're not paying for it, then you are the product. So, is there a data breach there that the organization needs to be concerned about? So, for me, the Jamie's issue here wasn't necessarily. It could be relying on AI, but the biggest issue that's certainly right in our face on this one is the fact that Jamie relied on research, AI research and statistics without going through any verification steps, and then allowing that material to move through the system, knowing that it was intended for publication. The other concern there, though, obviously, is that it did move through a system of verification. So this
That's what I
isn't
was about
just
to
on
ask.
Jamie.
Yes.
It's also on the organization, and Jay touched on that a little bit as well. Other people were also involved in reviewing and verifying this information, and so it seems to me that it isn't just Jamie who caused the problem, but it's also an organization that was really unprepared for the future that has arrived sooner than they were ready for it. So, for me, if I was investigating it, I would really try to break it up into those two things, right? I would be looking at what did Jamie do? Were there any policies in place? Did Jamie breach any duties to the employer? But then I would also be looking at, the organizational perspective. And, I might include both of those things in different sections of a report, or I might do separate reports, right? I might do a report based on sort of what happened with Jamie, and then a separate one, like a management issues type report that talks about the systemic issues in the organization, which could potentially even come with some recommendations around developing policy and training and that sort of thing. So those are really the two questions that I would be looking at, I think, in this case.
It's interesting because this is a common issue for workplace investigations, and that, like, what did this, investigating certain specific discrete issues, but also making recommendations and dealing with systemic issues
Mhm.
that the facts that kind of point you towards. And so this AI piece is a new is a new workplace issue, but it's really to be dealt with during an investigation the same way as other workplace investigations would be handled. But it does
Yeah.
require that thought because it's a new issue with new questions that would need to be asked of people and new implications. It's interesting.
It's a new issue, and yet a lot of times the existing rules and laws and the existing duties that employers and employees owe to each other, those still exist. AI doesn't change those things. It just sort of opens up a new way of having to deal with them, right? Those duties still exist exactly the same as they always did. Privacy requirements still exist the same as they always did. The issue with the introduction of AI is that it's become a little bit unruly because people are new to it. They're using it in ways perhaps that they haven't been properly trained to do it. Not everyone necessarily knows how to do it or even what those risks are, but they still exist and the rules around them still exist. And that's why it's so crucial that organizations sort of at least catch up to be with the curve, if not ahead of it, in terms of developing policies and developing training to try to avoid these types of issues.
Thank you. I mean, we're going through these issues quickly, and of course, they're very
Mhm.
complex, but we only have lunchtime today. Uh, so, Michael, then, as an investigator, can you use AI to help you investigate a case, this case, or any other case? What do you suggest?
Uh, yes, I can. And sometimes I have used enterprise AI tools, which have
Yay.
which have contractual security elements built in. But certainly I would never ever use a sort of a public one like a Claude or an open AI, ChatGPT or anything like that. And certainly never use that for anything that would include anyone's private information. And that's not just a matter of, entering in information and just sort of excluding names, because there's lots of pieces of data that you could enter into something that might be able to paint an interesting picture for someone on the other side potentially seeing it, or for it to be used to train the AI. Things about like dates and circumstances that could sort of point to who's involved, even if you're excluding names. So. Yes, there are certainly ways to use AI. I think you have to be very careful which AI you are using and how you're using it. Um, my position on how it can be used as an investigator is pretty straightforward. AI can assist me with an investigation, but it cannot be the decision maker. It can't substitute my judgment as an investigator. So I might use it to organize the file. I might use it for summarization of something, to build a chronology of events. I could use it to compare different documents and sort of pull out discrepancies between those types of documents. I could even use it in certain cases, drafting sort of first versions of things, but more along the lines of factual summaries, not drafting analysis or conclusions. You cannot farm that stuff out to a tool, because it requires like human discernment. Um, Another way that we can use AI as investigators is, and I'm sure some people are familiar with having sort of AI transcription tools, for example. So if I'm doing a virtual interview, say over Zoom or something like this. It can certainly be used to grab a transcript of the interview, of the questions and the answers, and that that can be very helpful. The way that I think that it's most helpful, and by the way, if I'm using though, I'm still going to be taking some handwritten notes myself. But I think the way that it can be most helpful there is it will allow me to concentrate and focus more on the interview and on the person that I'm speaking with, right? So AI cannot be a judge of credibility. It can't build rapport with anybody. I can't farm out empathy to the AI. Those are all part of the human interaction that's so crucial to this process. What it can do is it can allow me to focus on those things and actually be better at them because if it's taking a lot, more extensive transcription notes for me, I'm not spending my time doing that or being distracted doing that. I'm still taking some notes along the way, but I can focus on that aspect of the interview process and pay attention to things like body language. That can then help me as a human make decisions around things like credibility later. If I'm noticing, body language and other things that could potentially impact on those things. So that's another way that I can use AI. But again, I would never delegate credibility assessment or factual findings or analysis or conclusions to a tool because ultimately it does come down to my own discernment. A tool isn't really placed to be able to do that kind of thing.
Thank you. Jay, any comments on this discussion?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's the right approach, and that's what we're seeing is like humans won't be replaced. Like I think that the tools today, especially around where the human aspect of being able to read body language and that stuff is really crucial, and I think we're still a far away from where it will be able to kind of build trust and rapport and understand credibility. I think the use of the tools to help augment and to provide the value that we do as humans in terms of building those types of rapports is important. But I think exactly what Michael's point was is um, don't trust the tools. There's still hallucination that even with, where it's transcription, and there's even been reports even
Yep.
recently in Ontario with the medical, OMA, where their transcription tool made huge amounts of errors. And I think we're still at a point where you can't. And sorry, Michael, I think you're gonna make a comment in there too. So,
No, I was
um,
agreeing with you.
yeah,
Again, that's why I said, like, I'm using the transcription tool, but I'm also taking some notes myself. I may be
exactly.
able to pay sort of more attention because I know there is a transcription, but I'm not then just taking that transcript and dumping it in as a summary and using it as it is. Like, I still have to review all of it very carefully to make sure that it's accurate. You can't just say, okay, well, that part's done now, and I'm just going to dump that straight into my report. It still requires human verification.
Yeah,
That kind of brings us back to the core issue with what Jamie did in the first place, which is there was no human verification. We were talking about the hallucination earlier, like in terms
yeah,
of legal briefs, right, being filed with hallucinated cases. It's a lack of verification. If there isn't a, if you're relying on a hyperlinked case and the hyperlink goes to nowhere, it's probably not a real case.
yeah, yeah,
And I think, that's another important point. I think there's a big distinction between, the types of AI tools that you can use, right? So even if I'm doing legal research now and I go on, Canly or LexisNexis and there's an AI tool there, it's an AI retrieval tool. I can use it to dialogue essentially as almost like a super Boolean search, right? In a way, like I'm using
yeah,
it to refine my search in a way that I'm going to pull up more accurate information, but it's information that exists within that system. It's not hallucinating new information. So you always have to make sure, like, if you're not working in that kind of environment where it's a retrieval tool within a closed ecosystem, that anything that it pulls up, you're going to independently verify yourself. It's not eliminating the work. It's meant to support the work and perhaps make the work easier and do some of the heavy lifting of the administrative tasks, but it's not replacing thinking. It's not replacing discernment. It can't replace human creativity, right? It's great at pattern recognition, but I'm still the one that's going to have to decide, is this accurate? Is it not? And what does it mean at the end of the day, right? Truth doesn't get farmed out to the AI. It's still
no,
up to me.
no, absolutely.
Thank.
And I was just going to say, you just brought one quick point to that, we're seeing as well is that there's a lot of overlap now with a lot of these tools, right? And so that's an important consideration as well as you're talking through with education, to staff and within IT is that, transcription, you can transcribe potentially in using OpenAI or using Claude, or there's an official transcription process or software. And I think that's also very, very important is understanding what lane and where and how to use which tool and how it's sanctioned within that environment because there's a lot of bleed as people try to capture more parts of the market, so to speak, as it relates to that. So thanks, Millie, just kind of reminding me of that.
Thanks. This is an excellent discussion, and it's good for humanity that humans are still needed and important. Um, let's move along to the next to our next discussion. And thank you for those insights, Michael. Can we put up the slide? Okay. Now let's say that after after Michael's excellent investigation, he discovers that not only was Jamie not remorseful about what she did and didn't seem to understand the impact of her actions. In fact, there was some altered evidence. She was trying to cover up what she did, which does happen sometimes. And as a result of these various factors, management decides to terminate Jamie's employment. Um, what we're going to talk about is tools that uh, an employer could use to search for um, to search for how the particular facts in this case uh, can be applied to the law on employment, specifically reasonable notice and progressive discipline. So we're going to watch a quick video. We can't hear. Sorry, just give us a second for some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Still can't hear.
This is THAIMIS, a predictive legal platform built on Canadian case law. Today we're walking through its reasonable notice questionnaire. Using Jamie's scenario, first the basics. Jamie worked in Ontario in a provincially regulated role as an employee. Next, who Jamie is. A policy analyst, and so we can put professional. 28 years old. 18 months of service. 6 years of post-secondary education. No medical limitations. OAA sits in public administration. And policy analyst roles aren't scarce in Ontario, so there's no industry monopoly factor extending the notice period. Next, the inducement section. Jamie wasn't recruited away from a secure job and didn't relocate to take this one. Both are common factors that can stretch notice. Neither applies here. Compensation goes in next. The role isn't unique or highly specialized in the way a CFO or CTO would be. And there's no recent bonus or promotion on the record. Now, the termination context. Jamie wasn't job hunting before this. The decision had nothing to do with the agency's finances. And the employer is alleging cause, based on the AI misuse, alteration of documents, and the lack of remorse uncovered in the investigation. THAIMIS runs the inputs against similar cases and returns a range, in Jamie's case, 4 to 9 weeks. The report flags something important right at the top. This number presupposes that cause doesn't hold. So even with cause alleged, the platform answers the question every HR team actually needs to answer. If our cause argument fails in court, what is our exposure? For Jamie, that's roughly 1 to 2 months of notice, anchored in cases with a similar fact pattern. And reasonable notice is one of several predictive questionnaires inside the platform. Now back to the webinar.
Thank you. If we could just stop sharing that screen. Thanks. That's great. Okay, I'm just going to turn it over to Michael, who's just going to speak briefly about THAIMIS, just to explain what it does.
Sure. So THAIMIS is sort of the things we've been talking about today, like an enterprise tool, something that's a closed loop ecosystem where you can securely enter information without fear of it going sort of outside of that closed ecosystem. It's a tool that sort of blends sort of retrieval mechanisms, so it pulls up cases that are within that closed system and does an analysis of those to come up with a prediction based on the information that it gathers. I think one of the things that this tool really sort of demonstrates is that as you go through the steps, and this is important, it demonstrates a really good way of using AI generally, which is the quality of the output is based on the quality of the input, right? So in this case, the tool actually uses prompts to make sure that you're inputting all the necessary information to get the best quality output that you can. If you're using a different type of tool where you're not necessarily getting those types of prompts, these are the things that you have to consider when you're using it. And AI in that way is very relational, right? In the sense that you can actually dialogue with it and make sure that you're inputting better information to get a better output out of it. And if you're not happy with the input or the output that you get, you can try again. You can use different inputs, or you can engage in iterations, right? So you can do refinements along the way to do better prompts to get more and more information. You can interact with it in the sense of asking it to ask you questions so that you can better prompt yourself on how to prompt it, how to get the information. But a key thing with a tool like THAIMIS is that it's built into it in order to get the best information out of it because of the way that it prompts you to get that information, and it provides you with a bunch of data that gives you it doesn't replace legal advice or anything, but it gives you a reasonable range for consideration in terms of how you would approach that situation.
Michael,
Jay, you
I
might have some
know,
Uh,
more to say on the technical.
you
and
know, I
let,
was
and
going to
let me
say,
just let me
oh,
just
sorry,
say
go
that
ahead.
we actually have a question from participants. So
Oh,
go ahead, Jay, and then I want to ask the question.
I know when we were preparing, Michael, a question I had and which I found quite interesting was, I asked, obviously, is it using an LLM? Is it using something like OpenAI, or how is the AI being done? What I found interesting was just it's using actually a proven, with a reproducible and causability model, like with the statistics between all
Mhm.
the different cases. So if
Yeah.
you put, to your point, your prompts in exactly the same way, you always get the same answers. So you always can have that, which is much different than an LLM. If you put
Yes.
in a chatbot, you can get three different answers. And I see that all the time. And, sorry, I just wanted to bring that up because I just found it fascinating that because it's
Yeah.
using AI, but it's not using AI in the open AI or Claude. It's using more
Right.
traditional AI to have reproduce the
Reproducible.
answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's what you want when you're looking
Yes.
for
Yes.
case law. You don't
Yeah.
want a
Yes.
different answer every time.
Yes.
So no, that's
Exactly.
an excellent point.
Yeah.
We received a question on the 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 question is the system is based on the Canadian legal system, and
Mm.
the person is wondering whether it would be applicable to the Caribbean system, for example, the Trinidad and Tobago labor relations system. So really, I mean, the general question is, can it be used for other, other legal questions outside of Ontario?
As So
Go ahead.
the little I know is that I believe it's for Canada. I think the cases are for Canada. As you go to different jurisdictions, I don't think they have the case law for it, but that was just based on me playing with it from what I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
my
that
understanding as well, because it's based, again, it's a closed loop system. It's based on the information that's been inputted into it. So in order for it to be used outside of this jurisdiction, it would have to be expanded to be including other jurisdictions, and there'd be some time there to input that data and to train it on that data before it could be used outside of this area.
So it might be interesting as an exercise for somebody in
Mhm.
another jurisdiction, but it wouldn't be something that
Yeah.
you would want to rely on in the same way as you could rely on it for Ontario.
Unless you're, if you do a legal analysis and you find that the precedents are, very, very similar, I mean, it could be persuasive in some ways, right? If you're trying to get a range or an understanding, if the common law sort of operates in a very similar way, I mean, you could use it that way to sort of inform yourself, but I wouldn't take it and rely on it as like an absolute authority in another jurisdiction. I wouldn't rely on it for that anyway, right? It's meant to be informational, not determinative.
Okay, thank you very much. We're just going to do another poll now. Can we show this is a quick poll building on the last one. All right, this is asking whether your organization currently has a formal AI use policy. Yes, and we don't allow it. Yes, and we allow use of approved platforms. No, we're working on it, or something else.
I'm interested to find out the
Yeah.
answer.
Okay, do we have answers? Okay, that's great. I'm curious about the other,
Yeah.
but none that yes, and we don't allow it. And I think that's really interesting because a few months ago, that would have probably been different because I remember people telling me, no, no, we don't allow it, just don't allow it. But
Yeah.
now there's a recognition that no, it's here. All the things that we were saying, it's here.
Yeah.
People are using it, so we need to deal with it. And people are working on figuring it out. So any advice? Let's just talk about where do organizations need to go from here and what's out there that might be able to assist. Jay, do you want to start?
Yeah, the first thing I will say is, Naomi, you're right. Like the explosion of AI has been in the last few months, but I want to make sure everyone understands it's because there was a stepwise improvement in these models, probably somewhere between December and February, and so we've all been caught off guard, I think, in terms of the rate and the acceleration of change and improvements. And so I don't want people leaving here thinking that they're behind the curveball. In some ways, if they are, we all are, because it's just been so groundbreaking, really, in terms of the abilities and continues to be. Now, specifically on the tools and themselves, I think really HR and IT need to be talking about how they will govern, and how they will provide the right level of observability to these platforms to make sure they don't put the organization at risk. I think that's an important discussion to have. Because the models have accelerated so quickly, a lot of the tools are still nascent as well. I can't say that there is an organization or a single silver bullet that will solve this today. I think that there are things you can do working with your vendors like Anthropic, like Microsoft, like OpenAI that provide some level of visibility onto where and how people are using the tooling. And of course, with that though, people are not just putting in work stuff, right? In a lot of cases, there's personal information that's being put into that, which adds additional complexity of how that overlays. I mean, I understand that corporate tools should be only used for corporate stuff, but the reality of the situation is, there is some gray area, especially in Europe, where like things like email, as an example, even corporate email, aren't necessarily owned by the corporation. They can be interpreted to be private communication as well. And so I think that's an important consideration. And sorry, Michael, I think you wanted to jump in too. So don't want to
Yeah,
monopolize.
thank you. Yes. I mean, what you're saying, absolutely right. I completely agree. I think for me, often because of the type of work that I do with investigations, but also with supporting organizations with like workplace restorations, for example, is to start gathering information, start gathering data, because you can use that then to address the challenges. So for me, the first practical step for any organization that maybe isn't already doing this or is already sort of underway with policy is just to make sure that you start by conducting an honest audit really of the organization, like how is AI being already used, who's using it for what purpose, really understanding where the organization is, not in terms of the policies that have or have not been developed, or what sort of AI tools have been formally adopted or not adopted, but how are employees actually using this already? Because they are, right, in some fashion. So you really need to have an understanding of that in order to sort of shape your policies accordingly, to make sure that you are addressing all the various challenges.
So
So
for
I would
those
start there.
for those organizations that were using the ostrich approach, like this is for you. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you need to
that's right.
actually find out what people are doing because
Yeah,
they are using it.
that's
You
it.
just don't know. Not to sound too
Absolutely.
ominous.
No, but and I just laugh because the technologist goes right to a solution. And I think both Naomi, you and Michael are right. Is I think just talking to your employees, understanding from an audit perspective where and how they're using it, what their
Yeah,
needs are, and then with education and approved tools is really the right path forward. And with that, you can kind of slipstream in the right policy as well. Working with the employees so that they feel heard and that you're acknowledging the fact these tools are being used every day.
yeah.
I think, this has been a great discussion and we've talked about, the need to keep talking about it, right? Like you need to know what people are doing, you need to talk to them about what they're doing, you need to think about what you should do about it, what information you want to allow, not allow, what tools you're using, all of that, the implications of people using it, like the risks you're trying to manage. One last, uh, one last question, just probably for Jay. What's the cost to the organization? Like what, I think organizations are struggling with that. Like what are they in for on this?
Well, unfortunately, with AI adoption also comes increased usage and token costs. So you have, first of all, just the cost of, you're paying to the model providers, whether it's Anthropic, it's Microsoft, it's OpenAI. Um, and that varies depending on the type of organization and the type of work being done because if you're just putting in simple question and answer stuff, your token costs will be quite reasonable. And what I'd strongly recommend is use there are enterprise packages where they have fixed and predictable costing per employee. I would start with the lower tokens, excuse me, the lower tiers, and then assess how the adoption of AI is. And there are dashboards that can tell you where and how they're being used, and then moving up into the larger tiers. But that's just one. That's your kind of ground floor in terms of costs. There's also going to be human costs around IT and HR and the policies and education. And then there's going to be additional tooling that sits on top of those models that add additional capabilities and features, which will be varied based on the organization, but it needs to be considered and forecasted in when you look at it. So I wish I could tell you, it's going to be in this range or that. But what I've seen across different verticals is it varies from everything from honestly $10,000 a month for per employee in a very high tech specialized environment or somewhere in like science, biology, those types of things to, $20, $10 per month per employee, or even using what's included in your Copilot license because it's much more of a light usage. I will also say that it is sometimes worth evaluating based on your business case the different models because even though you might be getting something for free, as an example from Microsoft, there may be benefits around less hallucinations, better answers, just generally better not creativity, but better just a general interaction with the employees using other different providers, right? So evaluating Anthropic's model, evaluating OpenAI's model. Um, and then the last comment I will say is that once you stick on a given provider, you may evaluate on a quarterly basis just to see if you're getting the value from that money that you're spending. But also there are different models that they provide, and sometimes you don't need the most expensive model, which can be sometimes 10 times more expensive than some of the cheaper models that are actually quite capable for some of the day-to-day kind of office tasks that you might use it for. So those are all just things to keep in mind.
That is great and practical advice. Now, before we wrap up, we're just going to do one last quick poll. And I just don't want people to leave without telling us their thoughts about future topics. more AI, but other various workplace related issues. We would really appreciate your input on this. And you can answer more than one. Let's just give people a second. Okay, do we have results? Okay, I don't know if we have results or not. Okay, a lot of different things. That's awesome. People interested in various issues, and so we will take that away and for our planning of the next webinar. So let me say, as a wrap up, first of all, thank you to Jay and Michael, and also to Rio and Kate, who are working behind the scenes helping. And this has been really great, and I appreciate you taking the time. And thank you to all of you participants. We really appreciate your attention and your attendance here today. We hope we've given you things to think about. I certainly am thinking about this now and continuing to do so. As we know, AI is not going away and there's no right or wrong answer, nor is it static. We're thinking about it, we're working on it, and what we know is that organizations that manage AI thoughtfully will be better positioned to prevent disputes, respond effectively when they arise, and protect their people. Thank you all for your attention. And if you have any questions or follow-up, please do reach out to any of us. You'll receive a follow-up email with our contact information. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.